Thank you. Appearances, a moment when anybody may speak to the council on any issue they wish. Rules of engagement are on the back wall there, but the short form is 3 minutes, please. Introduce yourself, give us where you live, and be civil. Anyone for public comments?
Sure.
Come on up.
So my name is Susan Kaltenbach, and I'm at 2250 74th Avenue Southeast, over where the tow truck company used to be. I'm not very experienced in speaking in front of the public, so I'm going to stick my head into my notes here, and I promise I'll keep it short. So I'd like to speak about the city's proposed plastic bag ban. I know that the council had a plastic bag ban in their 2013 work plan, and it was discussed during the June 8th special mini meeting for planning, and the council directed staff to proceed with the next steps and bring forward an agenda bill with choices that included community input for the council's consideration. And I'm wondering if perhaps I missed my opportunity to provide input to the council. I saw this headline in the Mercer Island Reporter last week, plastic bag ban is on the menu, which made it sound like it was inevitable. And it could just be an exaggeration on the part of the author, but most of the material quoted was taken from city minutes and other records, and it seemed like connecting the dots made it sound like the decision was already made without community input. So,
in short, you are welcome to comment. The decision is not final, so this is perfectly timely.
Okay, so good. So my main comment would be make sure the community is involved, get as much feedback as you can, because this gives us a wonderful opportunity to educate people about sustainability initiatives, and also gives people a sense of community, being part of the community and actually interacting with what the decisions the sustainability manager makes. Okay? And the board. And that's about it. Thank you for it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, with that, we'll close public comments. Thank you. And move to the consent calendar. We have payables, payroll, and 3 agenda bills this evening. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull 4887.
Okay. Still hoping for a motion.
I move that we approve the consent calendar with AB 4887 removed.
Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And we'll put 4887 as our first item of regular business. And Mike, since you brought it up, you get to speak to it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually want to voice my support for this agenda bill and supporting Governor Inslee's climate legislative and executive work group, because I think it really makes that good policy of changing or forcing governments, organizations from doing do-good projects to actually doing projects that are evaluated with rigor of financial and carbon sequestration merits. So, and I say this in the background of knowing our resolution 1389, which is Exhibit 1. So I really want to publicize what I'm just going to call the CLUE, the Climate Legislative and Executive Workshop, what the CLUE does, the huge step forward it does in truly making some bite in sustainability projects. And this is what it says. The evaluation must include a review of comprehensive greenhouse gas emission reduction programs, including the effectiveness in achieving the jurisdiction's emission reduction objectives, including the cost per ton of emission reduction. And that's an improvement to Resolution 1389. I'll suggest, Mr. Mayor, that we re-tee up 1389 again to incorporate some of that language, because I'm afraid when we did Resolution 1389, and for everybody, 1389 is Mercer Island's resolution for promoting sustainable community. I'm afraid we've gotten to a point where we've done projects, we've made decisions, we've invested money, and we're not getting the bang for the buck, or, dare I say, we're not spending our citizens' money well. And so why do I say that? You know, and this is going to kind of touch a raw nerve, but that's one of the reasons we're up here. The community center solar array, we should have gone through, I would like to see us go through an evaluation process as the clue suggests. So when I go through the numbers, you know, I get a payback, assuming that we use coal, 100% coal in the production of our energy. Actually, we only use 6%, but assuming that we use coal, and the dirtiest coal out there, we have a payback, given the month's data on our solar array at the community center, of 50 years. And I don't think that's where we need to spend our money. Now, granted, I'm using the principle that any money, whether it's federal money, state money, grant money, or citizens' money, still has to undergo the same rigorous analysis. And so that's a for instance. And then another for instance, which our Resolution 1389 isn't forcing us to do, is the, for instance, the upgrade, the HVAC upgrade in the firehouse. As was briefed, that's a $50,000 upgrade that has a payback of 12 years. You know, I question whether that payback is worth an investment of $50,000. So a thing going forward, there's a Spokane has done an amazing standard in their sustainability, and I'll just read this quickly. Any future actions relating to the implementation of the recommendations contained within the plan, that would be the resolution, our sustainability resolution, shall only occur after a thorough financial analysis and feasibility study on the merits of the recommendation. The City Council is a legislative body, shall review the results of the analysis and studies, and where appropriate, take subsequent legislative action after public input and council deliberation to adopt the appropriate da-da-da. So what I'm saying is, this ordinance that you're asking us to endorse, I support for the language of forcing us to do a legislative, to do a financial analysis of the projects, sustainability projects that we undertake, and that would be a good basis. The next step would be to incorporate it into our Resolution 1389 to force us to do the financial exercise to see if we're really getting bang for our buck. And when I say bang, both that it pencils out from a return on investment to include a rational evaluation of the carbon that we don't put into the atmosphere.
Okay. Anyone else, or okay? Looking for a motion then, and
I'll be happy to move that we approve AB 4887, Council's support for Governor Inslee's climate legislative and executive work group process.
discussion. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Great. Thank you. We move to Agenda Bill 4886, Municipal Court Judge Reappointment.
Mayor and Council.
City Manager.
Every 4 years, state law requires that I make a recommendation on the appointment of a municipal court judge. Under Washington law, when you have a judge that is, in effect, a part-time judge as opposed to a full-time judge, that individual is appointed and confirmed by the legislative body. The other model for full-time judges is they are elected popularly. So Judge Stewart has been our municipal court judge from day one when we first opened the municipal court, and has been a successful jurist ever since. His current four-year term ends at the end of this year, and He has indicated an interest in another 4 years, and I am happy to recommend to you that we do that. As you also probably know, the City of Newcastle is a contractor for municipal court services with the City of Mercer Island. I have been notified by the City Manager of Newcastle that he too will recommend to the Newcastle City Council for reappointment of Judge Stewart. And so I recommend that to you. I don't know, Judge, do you have anything you want to say? Or okay. So I will tell you, I routinely, when I've done this, I've checked in with representatives from both the defense counsel and our prosecutor to just check in to see if the operations of the court seem to be moving fairly and smoothly and efficiently, and they all report exactly that. So I'm satisfied.
Tom?
Just to clarify on our action tonight, so this is purely about Judge Stewart and not about the number of hours and the number of anything like that, because I know we've had some discussions about court hours and how many hours that we use for the court.
This is purely about his reappointment to the bench. We then will negotiate and complete, and this will authorize that, a contract, an employment contract. In the last budget, we made an adjustment to the number of hours, I think down just a few, reduced it by about 4 hours, maybe 5 hours, to meet the caseload. And as I said then, and I'll say it now, if we get caseload increases and indicators of higher workloads, I'm prepared to increase it to whatever the caseload is. I mean, we go up, we go down based on the work. But those kinds of decisions would not come now. They would come at a budget decision.
Other comments, questions? All right. Judge, I can't let you get away without coming up and just having a few words for us, so.
Well, you know, I'm pleased to be before the council. It's been a fantastic 9-year run. I certainly want to do it for another 4 years, and it's been a pleasure. Yes, we did increase the actual number of in-court hours last year based on budgetary constraints. The one aspect of it that probably does not come before the council is the probationary aspect of it. That's not calculated in the actual AOC case levels, and every person that is found guilty of a criminal offense and ultimately put on probation is reviewed by me generally 30, 60, 90 days out. So that's, you know, not in courtroom work, but it's behind the scenes type work.
And His Honor is willing to do that. Many judges don't. Many times that is contracted out. That we get a great savings by having our judge actually do the probation work.
But actually, it's been a pleasure. I enjoy the interaction with the community, the interaction with the attorneys that come before me, and it's been, you know, a great pleasure. I can't say that everybody walks out of the courtroom in a very happy mood, because I have to make a decision. Some go for the defense, some go for the prosecution, and they have alternatives they can choose thereafter. But I certainly enjoy it and hope that you reconfirm me for an additional 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the judge? Okay, you're set. Thank you. Looking for a motion.
I move to confirm Judge Wayne Stewart continue as Mercer Island Municipal Court Judge for the 4-year term beginning January 1st, 2014.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you for your service.
Congratulations, Judge.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll continue to expect
The easiest
a lot of
re-election.
dressed up, busy folks here on Tuesdays. I always know it's Tuesday when I come in, the parking lot's kind of full, and a lot of people looking dressed up, so. And nervous.
You got a favorable verdict tonight.
Yes, that's right. Okay, we move to Agenda Bill 4888, Status Report on City Work Plan to Oppose I-90 Tolling. welcome Noel Treat.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the council. It's good to be here. Noel Treat, Deputy City Manager, with tonight's status report. Why don't we jump right in? As usual, we haven't had one of these exactly like this for a little while, but tonight I'll give you the quick status report and then open it up to any questions that you have. So first, on the state legislature front, they're still talking about possibility of a special session to address solely the transportation funding question. It's unclear if they will actually have that special session. There's some possibility it would get bumped over into the regular session if they can fit it in. So we're still watching that and trying to figure out what opportunities we might have as a special session or as funding is considered in the regular session. We're currently working with our lobbyist, our state lobbyist, the same one we worked with last time around, to strategize about some opportunities for additional funding for 520 and some other things. And then I think you might have all seen, and it will be put up on our webpage shortly for our citizens to see if they haven't. There was a letter from Senator Litzow and Representative Clibborn to WashDOT about the intent of the EIS and the intent of the language that the budget proviso they adopted last year. WashDOT is talking about congestion relief, and the senator and representative pointed out that the real impetus of their legislation was not congestion relief. It was to ensure that disproportionately impacted communities or residents or citizens, that those impacts would be looked at in the study and mitigated if they were able to. So.
And I can chime in here that in a conversation with Craig Stone last night, he said the letter only just reached them yesterday.
Yeah, so. And our history with them is it takes a while for a response, so we'll see. We'll see when that comes back. But as on the environmental study itself, the scoping period is open right now. I think most of you were at the meeting, the public meeting last night at the high school. I haven't yet heard from WashDOT what they think the total turnout was or how many comments were in total received, but we'll be getting that information and passing it along. There's one meeting left in this part of the process tomorrow night, 4 to 7 in Seattle at the African American Museum. So if residents didn't get a chance to go this week on Mercer Island, they have this additional chance. And I'll also emphasize for everyone, comments made in the public meetings don't get any more. They're not any better than comments that are submitted in writing or online. So all the comments have to be considered by WashDOT. So if people are unable to make any meeting, they still should submit a written comment if they want to have their voice heard.
So I didn't get a count either, but King 5 report hundreds were there.
That's very fair. I asked at about 7, and they were up to some 50 people who had spoken. So
over 300 had, almost 300 had registered, signed in.
Yeah.
Noel, before you go on, I probably should have mentioned this to you earlier today. On October 10th, in addition to those 3 meetings, I attended the tribal and agency scoping meeting. So this was a daytime meeting for, mostly it was the cities up and down the I-90 corridor, and very similar in the kinds of information and exchange as what you saw last night, but it was not really a public input opportunity so much as just a briefing. And all I can report from it is the cities up and down the corridor are there, they're interested, and they're interested in the topic. They know there's an EIS going, so they're going to participate at some level.
Rich, are they going to reschedule that? Because it happened during a brief little hiatus in the federal government's ability to fund themselves.
Yeah, I was wondering, I thought you were going to come join us. I
could, but I didn't.
There weren't a lot of federal employees there. There was a lot of state and local, but no federal.
And then I don't have a bullet point up there on this point, but I want you to know that our legal counsel is currently working on our scoping letter. So we should see a draft of that soon. I know we're going to touch base with some members of council before that's finalized. So look for that.
No, ensure that letter is CC'd to the folks that we've been trying to get CC'd.
The litigation firm and others, yes, as well as some of the congressional delegation. On the coalition building front, we understand that King County and PSRC are currently in talks trying to define the scope and timeline for the regional study. We don't have a definitive scope or timeline yet, but but that should be coming soon. I think they're hoping to tee that up so that it runs consistent with the EIS and that can help inform the EIS. On the federal front, we have our legal counsel in Washington, D.C. Regularly checks in with FHWA. There hasn't been a lot of new coming from them really since just after our visit, but we continue to ask every few weeks or so. We passed on the letter from Senator Litzau and Representative Cliburn, and they were going to share that with FHWA as well. It might have some relevance on the question of federal law and how it will apply, because what the senator and the representative are saying is this isn't about congestion relief. This was about really about revenue, and then when we added additional provisos, it was just about how to mitigate the impacts. So that might make it harder for WashDOT to argue that this is really about traffic congestion relief, which is one of the criteria, one of the mandatory criteria they have to meet to get federal approval. So we'll see how that goes. We've continued to get email updates out. Yeah.
I want to thank you for bringing that up, because that may have been glossed over a little bit, but keep in mind that the value pricing program was developed specifically to address congestion, not revenue or mitigation or cutting special deals or anything else. It was all about congestion relief. And that's very damaging information that we can use.
I think
and
so.
I anticipate we will use.
When we've got the two key legislators that authored some of that legislation saying that's not what it's about, that's can be very relevant.
Yeah, that's really important.
I was pleased to see that FHWA was in the listening session last night at the table with WashDOT.
Yeah.
But let's also remember that they're trying to mainstream into the Section 129, which has a couple other requirements. So I think we want to also continue to push that the original intent was to fund 520, but also look at the eligibility requirements under Section 129. So there's.
Yeah, good point.
I don't know. I don't recall the name of the woman that was there. Yeah, I'm sorry.
And then finally, on the budget, we've just about expended the last appropriation. As you might recall, we were here earlier this year, and you made an additional appropriation of $125,000. We're down to the last bit of that funding in paying for our EIS scoping letter and some of the state legislature work we're doing with Strategies 360. So I'll be coming back on November 18th with a budget request. I'll be working with the steering committee to sort out what we want to include in that request. And I don't have an estimate yet. I'm still waiting for some budget proposals from both our attorneys and our lobbyists. But I want to give you a heads up that that'll be coming.
Bruce and Noel, on that issue, it's come to my attention that the tolling office has assumed that they are providing funding to agencies to participate in the EIS process. That was news to me at the federal level, because we have not seen any money, nor will we accept it.
And Rich made the request early on of WashDOT that we wanted funding to help us, and they said no.
That little piece of information came to me from the director of this tolling effort on I-90 about 2 weeks ago, that they were providing some funds to the usual federal agencies that weigh in on these kinds of things, like National Marine Fisheries. And so, yeah, when you said it was news to you, I found that very interesting.
Well, and it raises, because I think we need to circle back with them, and we could have very specific requests related to the EIS, but that money should be accessible by local governments in order for us to help scope out the entire process, which we're going to do, deal with the purpose and need issues, and if there are analyses that are done and we want to have someone on our side, check them out, again, that's money that we can access in order to be able to do this.
Well, we'll definitely follow up on that. That'd be great if we could acquire some funds there, because for instance, one of the people we need to get on board at this point is a transportation expert to help us monitor the analysis of WashDOT, and it'd be great if we could get some help funding that. Okay.
Dan, did you have something?
That's it. Any questions?
Just, do you have a sense of when the draft EIS is? I get it, the next time the public will interact with Department of Transportation will be when the draft EIS shows up. Is there anything between this completion of the scoping process and the actual draft EIS?
What WashDOT has told us is that as a participating agency, we will see their work as it goes. We'll see their consultants and experts' analysis and reports as they're produced throughout the process. So that will give us some opportunity to see where they're going and weigh in a less formal way. But the next formal opportunity, you're right, will only be that draft EIS.
The public will get some access or input to the survey that they're going to do.
Yeah, and there's the survey that you might have seen. They had a board up about it last night. They will be conducting a survey in November. They're going to mail that out to all island residential addresses as well as businesses to gather data about usage and how many trips people make, how many employers have that live off island, things like that.
And because most people, I think, tend to ignore things they get in the mail that look like surveys, probably becomes incumbent upon us to make sure people understand what this survey is and that it is coming. And
yeah, we'll, leading up, I forget the exact date in November, but leading up to the date that they start mailing, we'll get word out through our channels, try and get something in the Reporter, which I think WashDOT is doing as well. They have a campaign, an advertising campaign planned around this survey.
I have Debbie, Mike, and Mike.
Just one quick question. Is this, so Mercer Island only is being surveyed, or the communities along the corridor?
I think it's just us at this point.
No, once they identify which reports they're going to do, we, as participants in this process, really should push for getting the drafts of any of those before they go final.
Yeah, and they've told us they're going to do that.
Okay.
So that's hopefully going to come to fruition.
Right?
Thank you. What are we going to do for messaging? And the context I say that is I don't think we're ahead of WashDOT in messaging. I had two ladies who I consider in the know who kind of sheepishly came up to me and said, really, it's going to happen, Mike. And I said, no, it's not a done deal. I would like to see in the budget that you're going to present a plan and allocations. Of course, is for the council to decide, but and for the steering to direct. But I would like to see in this budget a plan and the funds to support it on our message. Tolling is not a done deal. That's the message, and explaining why that is. And the message shouldn't just go to islanders, but it can go to our surrounding communities, and certainly get the communities of even Congressman Adams and certainly Reichert.
Okay. Well, that's something maybe...
Well, you can't say okay. I mean, I should be looking at you. No, I should be looking at the council on that.
Well, what I was going to follow up and say is I will bring that before the steering committee when we meet. We're going to meet soon, and as one element of the budget to consider to bring back to council.
Is that a council decision, or is that a steering committee decision?
Well, ultimately, everything's a council decision, right? The steering committee only tries to get things to move forward, and everything that's of moment has to come to the council.
Well, I guess the council can direct the steering committee.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I would like, I should have, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I don't want to have to say that all over again, so, okay, good. I don't mind repeating it. You want me to repeat it again?
Mike, I guess
go ahead, Mr. Mayor, if you'll take that and run with it.
Well, what I would be looking for, I guess, is if you have specific, because we have in place a messaging campaign that...
Well, no, we don't. I don't think we do.
Let me complete the thought, because we do have a campaign, and what I'm hearing from you is that that's inadequate to the purpose that you intend. And so what we have now is an email, regular emails going out to one list. We have our city emails that include sometimes I-90 information that goes out to I think it's a broader list or a different list. But we're not doing, for instance, snail mail kinds of things? And so help me understand
Okay,
what it is
let me help you
that
understand.
you're trying to...
So often, we evaluate programs on inputs and not outputs. So programs should get evaluated on outputs. So when we're into this thing for, how long have we been doing this? Since forever. And I've got two ladies who come up to me who I consider in the know with community events, and still they think that tolling is a foregone conclusion. Our output on our message campaign isn't working. So what I would like to see, and this is a point that I've had in the beginning, is our message campaign was more to tell citizens either what we're doing or what they have to accept, versus a message that recognizes what WashDOT's message is. And I'll clearly say that I think WashDOT's message has not been completely on the uppity up. Maybe not even truthful. And we need to get out ahead of that message and recognize that that politicians are ultimately going to make these decisions. WashDOT's not going to make the decision. Politicians at many different levels in many different areas, and our messaging needs to be to lay out the facts as we see them. Not that facts are up for interpretation, but as we see them, as we know with our legal beagles and everything, and have a message to that point.
So let me ask, do you believe that the problem is that the message that, so the two people that you're speaking of, did they receive the messaging that we've been putting out and interpret it in the fashion you're describing, which is tolling's a done deal, or did they not receive that messaging?
I have not seen.
You understand what I'm trying to get at?
I think the reason the reason I prefaced and said there are folks that I consider in the know is because they're folks that would be reading our messages.
Okay, so their email, they're
yeah, I fully
emails.
expect that. Yes, I would expect that.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Go ahead.
I think you definite merit on the questions, definite merit on the comments coming from Councilmember Ciro. Because I heard a lot of the similar feedback last night, and I think in part it's because the presentation that came from WashDOT and various people who were there, I'd say was definitely weighted toward we're often running down this tolling direction. And it did present tolling mitigation options numbers 1 through 6. You know, and if you didn't go to every single board and scrutinize and have question and answer, I think I would have walked in there and assumed the same thing. So there's a certain circumstance for the conditions that were presented last night. But I'd also go back to the work plan that we had, and there was a communication component, which has largely been based on the emails that have come from the city as well as outreach that some of us specifically and even in small groups have done. I do think that it's probably time for us to look at revisiting that, particularly in light of the EIS draft that should be coming out soon, and asking ourselves, what is it we need? Do we need new vehicles? Do we need to revise the messaging and where we are? So I do think last night was a bit of a, for me too, I was a little bit culture shocked, thinking, is this really what I think it is? But the work plan, yes. I'd say I'm happy to continue to work on that, and Mike, if you want to sit down together, let's look at it and figure out, what the recommendations are, I think.
Yeah. Mike Grady?
This points out the problem that you run into when you're doing an EIS is if you let someone else drive the train, they will drive it, and their message, they will keep sending until they get to the end of the line. And, all the media reports on the meetings so far have been, to your point, Mike, tolling is going to happen, so now what can we do to mitigate the impacts? And all of the coverage that I saw dealt with Mercer Islanders and how can we cut a special deal for Mercer Island in order to lessen the blow. And, we've talked about this for many a month. We don't want to go down that path because you have no guarantees. And, it would be like State Fair's telling the folks in Winslow, we're going to cut you a special deal because you live pretty close to the water, but those that live in Poulsbo, we're going to charge you a little bit more. Well, at the end of the day, the people that live in Winslow are going to get the same, ferry charge that the people in Poulsbo will get. Same thing will happen here. And so I think we need to be really cautious and really upfront that the purpose of this EIS is not to look at mitigation. It's to look at a whole suite of various impacts, including public health, greenhouse gas emissions, congestion, and a litany of stuff that we need to send to them and have them go away, come up with reports on each one of those, come back, we go back and forth and analyze those reports, and then at the end of the day, we have a decision about, okay, is the environment better off if we toll Line 90, or is it better off if we do all of these other things, all these other analyses, which we're going to, I'm assuming we're going to ask them to do. And we're going to put, some heads together and come up with a very long laundry list of issues and various ideas of things that they need to analyze, including alternative funding mechanisms. Because the concern that I have is PSRC has developed the 2040 plan pretty much based on the fact that they think they're going to toll everything and that's going to solve the problem. Well, they know for a fact that they can't toll everything because they don't have the money to do it. They don't have the egress and ingress in order to be able to do that. Imagine tolling 522, for instance. You can't do it. Imagine tolling I-5 in downtown Seattle. You can't do it. But that's a part of the overall plan somehow. So our job is really, as opposed to, I agree with the message, but our job is to be kind of the scientists to say, wait a minute, what are the impacts if you do this, and look at the overall system and not just Mercer Island, because we really have to play the game and play it very upfront and not look solely at Mercer Island, but look at the whole region and look at all the attendant impacts that could be associated with tolling I-90 and then moving congestion from 90 off to 522, off to I-5, off to 405, and significantly down to 405 down in Renton and South Seattle. That brings in a whole litany of other issues that Nolan, Bruce, and I have talked about. If you're going to move greenhouse gas emissions into communities of concern, Renton, South Seattle, that brings in the Environmental Protection Agency into this whole EIS process, and that raises the stakes significantly. That's the kind of stuff we need to do. We need to, not do the knee-jerk reaction, which WashStat is going to want us to do, and sit there and talk about, well, how can we mitigate the impacts to Mercer Island? Don't go down that path. Okay? Give them a laundry list of homework assignments and let us analyze all of those back and forth. And this EIS should not come out soon. It should take years. And I'm not kidding. It should take years for them to do this. They've got $5.2 million in the budget. Apparently they're not willing to share it with us. So we want $5.2 million plus of analytical work that they are required to do by state and federal law. And that's our job, is to make sure we keep them on that task. Sorry, I don't mean to preach to you guys, but I've been through so many of these processes, and if they come out and they say, well, it's this, and they've already predetermined the purpose and the scope of need, they can't do that. We have a role in how that is designed. We have a role in the purpose and need. We have a role in the overall scoping. We have a role in all the analytical issues that we want them to look at, and particularly we want them to look at not only the environmental impacts, public health impacts, but there are other options out there to fund 520 other than tolling I-90, and chances are they have less of an impact both on the environment and on public health and everything else.
And the message...
Mike, let me give Ton a shot.
I'm
headed back to you.
You had your hand up.
Yeah.
I think Councilmember Cero's point is also that we've done a lot of communication, and we also have to make sure we look at the messaging of communication. So we've been communicating with the community with the great emails that we've been putting out and with inviting people to the forums and that sort of thing, but we have to stay on top of the messages. And part of that is, if there is a special session, if there are changes to the transportation package or if the transportation package passes, and the messages that we have may very well change about tolling. If 520 is funded in some other capacity, are we all of a sudden for tolling on I-90? I don't think so. So we're going to have to switch our message or make sure that we're expanding and finessing our message so that it's not about we're not for tolling federal highway to pay for another state highway. We're against tolling for other reasons as well. So we're going to have to make sure that our messages are getting out there and not just our communications, but our messages. Why are we fighting this? What are the impacts on the broader community, like Mike was saying, and really make sure that we are targeting not just the communications to people, but the messages that we want them to hear.
Okay, Mike?
That's all right. I think there's consensus on the...
There certainly seems to be consensus that there's more work to be done on the messaging angle, so thank you for bringing that to us. Dan?
I'm all for messaging. I just want to remind the council that it is not like we haven't done anything for the last 6 months. And the types of things that Mike Grady was talking about, those are extremely valid points, and the points that you made 6 months ago to the council. And the result of those points, we have the legislation that set up the EIS, that required the EIS. We have the PSRC study, which we advocated for and is now going to be done. We have the mayor's letter that Bruce was so instrumental in putting together. We have the Sound Cities resolution, more than 30 municipalities who joined with us in pushing for exactly all this. This is not like we woke up on October 22nd, whatever today is, and October 22nd, and we suddenly realized that no one heard our message. And Mike, I respect your opinion, obviously, and I agree with you completely. We need to keep getting out the message, but we have, as a city, and as Noel just reported, we've spent a substantial amount of money in this effort, and a lot of staff time and a lot of council time, and we have been extremely successful in what we've accomplished, working for exactly what you've wanted and what you've wanted and what everyone on this dais has wanted. So let's not sell ourselves short. We've got a long ways to go, but a lot of things we've asked for are exactly what's being done now. So let's not beat ourselves up.
Debbie?
I'm actually going to change question. I was speaking with some of the Washtop people last night and was asking them about how their conversations in alignment with PSRC were going. And, obviously what they said is open to my interpretation, but I walked away feeling like they were not particularly interested. They did not feel that there was both alignment or concern about shared methodologies, shared questions, shared objectives, anything. It was a very dismissive response. And I'm wondering, to what extent, should we be working to really focus on bringing these two together? On the other hand, you could argue that if the two studies are structured differently and come up with different answers, you have, conflicting data if and when somebody makes a decision. But I was just, needless to say, very, very surprised that they were so dismissive of the PSRC work and their responsibility to coordinate with them.
I think that's something we need to watch and strategize about. We're due to try and have a meeting with PSRC to understand where they are and where the county is going forward. I think Rich might have some more information about that.
Well, I don't really have a whole lot of information. If outwardly they appear disconnected and maybe dismissive of that work, I know for a fact that behind the closed doors, they're very involved in that work. So I find it all very interesting to watch WashDOT through this process. So I do know that they are very involved in that work. They are on top of it, and they are at the table.
Okay. Noel, I think we're wrapped up here,
All right.
Unless you got anything else.
No, the only thing I'd just add to the discussion about messaging is, I think, as some of you've said, I think we've done a good job with the messaging we've done to date, especially to the decision makers, and that's been our focal point because we wanted things like the EIS and we wanted Federal Highways to take special note of this situation, and I think we've been very successful there. So part of what we'll need to think about as we think this through is what is the right time for messaging out to citizens about things like this isn't a done deal. There's not anything before the legislature, as far as we know, to authorize tolling this session. Maybe there will be next session. Maybe it's even the session after that. So we ought to just also think strategically about, not that we shouldn't keep people fully informed in a meaningful way throughout the process, but as we think about messaging, we also need to have a thought about timing and strategy.
Well, I kind of disagree with that. I think your next bogey out there is to assume the special session is going to go and to message for the alternative funding. So just
Yeah, no, I agree with what you just said, but I mean, in terms of sort of tolling specific related messaging, I think we just need to give some thought, because we want to use
It's a
our money wisely.
yin or yang thing. If we can message that tolling's not going to happen and they need to fund it otherwise.
But Mike, with all due respect, I mean, that's exactly what our legislators have made it very clear they're trying to achieve. They're trying to get more money to avoid the need for tolling. So it really, that's, as you know better than anybody, this is going to be something, if that special session happens, it's going to require a lot of effort on our legislators.
We've got to keep an eye on our legislators, because remember why we're here, in the situation we're in.
All right?
Donna?
Yeah.
Remember, everybody, we are
counting
one
on
of
you.
our legislators.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Be exempted.
Thank you very much. No motion or action required by the council. At this point, we'll see a budget and budget authorization next month. We move to Agenda Bill 4879, adopt ordinances amending Mercer Island City Code regarding funds. And for this, we have Luan. Welcome.
So, Luan Tuttle, accounting manager, for the record. It has recently come to my attention in the last 5 minutes or so that the agenda packet that went out for this particular agenda bill was missing some pages in some of the exhibits. So I believe Deb just handed out some revised ones. We'll see if we can't fight our way through it.
So just to be clear, this afternoon, in trying to read through the with edits version of the ordinance, realized that was very difficult reading and asked Deb for a final version of it, and I found that to be much better reading. And that I forwarded on to the rest of the council members.
Okay.
Is this that, or is this something else?
No, this is the tracked version that you originally received, and unfortunately, the paper agenda bill that went out with the packets last week, my fault, every other page was missing.
Okay.
And I thought that we had corrected that, but I did not correct the entire
No wonder it was
agenda bill.
hard to read.
Didn't bother looking at the page numbers.
I kept thinking, because and the thing that made it complicated,
There were 3 yes votes anyway,
yeah,
though.
but the thing that made it complicated to read was that you had renumbered everything, and so what I kept
Yes.
thinking was that I can't find it here because it's numbered someplace else in the system.
But the electronic version that you did receive, and for those who received the electronic packet, that is correct. What you'll see up on the screen when Luan goes through it is correct, of course. All the pages are in the electronic version. It's just a printed version.
All right, well.
See, there you go. There's another argument for breaking away from the dead tree packet.
I'm not buying that one, not buying it.
That was a trick on Ross my
Agreed.
part.
So, all right, we have at least 2 hours to talk about this, guys, so let's let Luan get started.
We're out of here by 8:30, guys.
Perfect. So we'll just get started. The primary purpose of the agenda bill before you, 4879, is really housekeeping in nature. As it stands now, Chapter 440 of the Mercer Island City Code was mostly adopted in 1980 with Ordinance 495 and has been largely untouched since then. Clearly, 30 years, a lot has changed in that time. So the reasons we're bringing this together are forward now, as opposed to largely ignoring it, is we were required for financial statements in 2011, the audited financial statements, to implement Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement 54, which was titled Fund Balance Reporting and Governmental Fund Type Definitions. What the GASB would try to do with this statement was to redefine funds, how they're used, and sort of make broader consistency across all government entities. So in implementing that, we really had to dive into the funds we were using and sort of justify either continuing to use them or changing how we use them. And that led us to researching our own codes and our own statutes to figure out what we were doing and why, to document that for audit purposes. And what we came out of that was there was no real major changes for financial reporting purposes, but in looking at Section 440, clearly we needed to do some updating. So here we are. Most of the changes that we're proposing are really just housekeeping, or in fact all of them are, and can be categorized either as deleting or repealing sections of the fund that are defining funds that are truly obsolete, so no longer in use and no longer necessary, so we just need to repeal those sections. We are amending some of the sections to just clarify language So they are more up-to-date and consistent with the terminology and the vocabulary that we're used to using in finance and also when we adopt the budget. And then we also need to add a couple of funds that are not there, that we do budget, and they should be there. And those two are the sewer fund, or no, the stormwater fund and the capital improvement fund. We're budgeting those, we're using those, and they're not in this code section, so we need to add them. The primary goal, sort of overreaching goal of doing these amendments is to really get this section of the code in line with the funds that we're budgeting. So when you think of your budget document, that last section I, the recap by funds, there's a list of the current funds that we're budgeting, that council adopts a budget for. The code section 440 should mirror that, in effect. It won't be an exact replica because things change over time, but there should be some consistency between those two things. So that's why we're here. The changes don't delete any funds that were currently in use. It's just updating and make it, like, again, consistent. There are no changes to the authority of the council. You retain 100% authority in authorizing what expenditures we use out of those funds. This is really just defining what funds are out there and why. The other thing, like the mayor noted, was in doing this, we were removing about half of the funds that are listed here because they are obsolete. So we also wanted to take the opportunity to renumber the section as a whole so it is numbered more consistently with other sections of the Mercer Island City Code. The other thing we tried to do is across the city code, anywhere where funds were mentioned, we wanted the definitions to be consistent. So there is a second exhibit which does some minor changes to section, or chapter 3.55, I believe it is, defining the Mercer Island Arts Council, because in that it mentions the Mercer Island Municipal Arts Fund, which is now obsolete or no longer in use. So we wanted to clean that up also. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. If you have any questions.
Questions? Tana. And then Debbie. Oh, sorry, Dan, I didn't catch it. So Tana, Debbie, Dan.
I noticed that the Open Space Property Acquisition Fund is marked as obsolete and therefore to be removed. However, I thought in our Parks and Rec committee meeting we talked about some open fund acquisition dollars, and I was just confused that don't we still have money?
I believe those are currently budgeted, so any open space sort of programs or acquisitions are currently done through our capital improvement fund. The one that's in this, the statutories that it refers to are now all obsolete. So this is a pretty old fund and code section, and we currently now handle it through the CIP.
Yeah,
so the function is more there, just not in this fund.
Function stays. Yes. I think that old fund was one we probably created when we got either a bond issue passed for open space acquisition or a county contract through a county bond issue, and we accounted for it in a special place. We do that all through the CIP now.
Debbie? Okay.
So I appreciate the housekeeping. I guess my concern is over the very first section, Amendment 4.40010 on page 7.
Okay.
Which gives the Director of Finance the authority, without the consent of the Council, to create or cancel a specific fund in accordance with the applicable rules of the State Auditor and generally accepted accounting principles. So I'm looking at this, and I'm trying to think, well, I can understand how you cancel a fund. But I looked, and if our Director of Finance decided that he or she needed to create a fund, and I look at what it means to have a fund, and it includes the purpose and the revenue sources and all the things that you would expend, what you'd pay for from that fund, and I'm trying to envision how we could give the Director of Finance that kind of authority that he or she could just go and write effectively a code section deciding how a fund is going to be, all the intricacies of a fund. I'm a little bit confused what the intention of that language really is.
And if I'll pile on here because I have the same question, but the way I came at it was, it's almost mirroring what you said, but if what this document does is to define all the funds we need, why do you additionally need the authority to go and do more without any council involvement?
I think to say there would be no council involvement is a little bit misleading. The intent sort of this is to allow us to do things. If you think of the most recent budget document, we added a fund for the construction of Fire Station 92. So there was a bond ordinance that allowed us to go out and get dollars to build that. We actually created a fund, and it's temporary, meaning it's not going to go on past the phase where that money is all spent and the building is built. So the intent of sort of this language is to allow the finance director to say, yes, we need to create a new fund for this specific purpose for this period of time. What's important for the council to understand about that is no dollars can go into that fund and no dollars can be spent from that fund without a budget ordinance allowing that. This really just allows the finance director to make some decisions on whether or not a new fund for a specific purpose is warranted or not. It would always come before the council either in a budget document or in amending budget ordinance saying we want to do this, here's how we want to spend it. The hope is that we don't have to come back and continually do code updates to this particular section of the codes for temporary funds or funds that will only last as long as the funding source is there. And the fire station bond issuance is a really perfect example of that.
Thank you.
Well,
But yeah, if you have more, go.
no, I mean, I'll just wait till we finish questions.
Okay. Debbie?
My question is probably an extrapolation of the one that Dan raised, and that is, you made a specific comment in that there was no change in the authority of council. And my question is, are there changes in the authority of staff that are in here? And I would say that Dan's might have been a potential example.
Well, I think that it's evident, if you look at the code as it exists now, that a lot of funds have come and gone in the time since 495 was adopted in 1980. That has all happened within the limits of staff authority and council authority. The intent of this exercise is really just to get this updated so it reflects what's actually happening in reality. From my perspective, I don't know that this is changing staff's authority. It's more just acknowledging what has happened in reality over the past, 3 decades since this was originally adopted.
I'll just have one more follow-up. I'm sorry for what you just said before, that no money can go into a fund or come out of a fund without council approval. I'm sure in theory that makes sense, but I know that on a day-to-day basis, CHIP is putting money. We don't know exactly what's going to go into. We don't know the exact amount of money that's going to be deposited into a fund because you don't know what the revenues are going to total. We get a budget, but we don't know what actually goes in. And during the year, there may be a month where CHIP needs to take more out of a fund than we had budgeted, and then comes back to the council 3 months later and says, this was a circumstance, and just wanted to let you know that this is what happened, and I need you to pass a resolution authorizing what I did before, which is perfectly appropriate, and we don't have a problem with that. But so, if I want to get nervous about these things, and whether it's Chip or whoever is finance director creates a fund and then starts putting money into it and expending money from it, and then he or she can do that. I mean, it's happening right now. There's no lock on there which says unless the city council turns the key, you can't put money in or out. That's not really what happens.
Well, I think if it was up to the finance department, we'd only have one fund and let the rest all get where it was. I mean, we're not out there looking to create funds. That's definitely not our intent, nor what it would be. Governmental accounting principles and generally accepted accounting principles dictate that you only have the number of funds that you necessarily have to have, and everything else has to be in the general fund. So there are restrictions on what we can do and still be in compliance with sort of state audit rules, with governmental accounting rules, and honestly, this is just to enable us to do that in the places where it makes sense.
When you adopt the budget, you actually are conferring authority to the staff to spend within the limits of that budget. And if that means Chip has to move money between funds, he has to do it within the adopted budget. But that is conferring authority to go do a lot of things. If that's not the case, you would be here every 2 weeks doing accounting decisions till midnight.
And I appreciate that, but that's why I have a hard time with this language, because you got a chicken and egg problem that I don't.
Well, let me give you an analogy, and maybe this is helpful, maybe not, but of what I think this is, and you guys tell me it's your account, so you probably won't agree with it, but as an analogy, in your own home accounting or financial management, you decide that you want to account for some activity in your home finances, and to do that you want to open a checking account at a bank just for that activity. That's what this is. That's the analogy. It's the opening of the account. Doesn't give us any authority to put anything in it or to take anything out of it. It's just opening the account or closing the account.
But see, that's the problem I have with what you just said. It doesn't get it right now. If you read the way we set up a fund, if the finance director now has the authority to do everything that's in one of these, he or she can write out that we're creating the ABC fund, and the ABC fund will be funded with, there'll be $50,000 a year taken from the general fund and transferred to the ABC fund, and the ABC fund will be used to pay for widgets. And the finance director can put all that down and then come to us 3 months later and say, by the way, I created this fund, the ABC fund, I spent $50,000 in widgets, and now I'd like you to approve that.
And if he didn't have the authority to do that, then he'd have to set up some accounting within the general fund or within some other existing legal fund. And it would be clunky, but that's what they would do. We'd have the authority to do it within existing funds, or go up open to that new checking account that I just referred to, so that you can be a little cleaner about how you're accounting it.
All right, I think I'm going to suggest we move on. Seeing no other immediate hands, I'm going to ask another question, and this one really is more of a curiosity than I guess it's an aside, but I'm going to ask it nevertheless. It's at 4.40180, Youth and Family Services Fund.
Okay.
So I'm curious about sections B and C, and maybe I'll just read them. So funding for the Youth and Family Services Fund shall be by private or public gifts, endowments, donations, bequests, or other sources or grants which are intended to be deposited in the Youth and Family Services Fund. That's B. And then C is all gross revenue earned by the Mercer Island Thrift Shop shall be deposited in the Youth and Family Services Fund, and use shall be committed to the development and delivery of human services and related programs provided by the Department of Youth and Family Services. So I had two questions. One is, it seems like B is the miscellaneous money that goes in, not the main money that goes in. And so why call it out as what appears to be the main money? And then in C, it says all gross revenues go to Youth and Family Service, and my first thought was, wouldn't it be net? Because don't you pay for the running of the thrift shop out of the revenues from the thrift shop before you put the money, the net into the...
Technically, the thrift shop is a division of the Youth and Family Services Fund. It is accounted for as a sort of department within the Youth and Family Services Fund, as a special revenue fund. The thrift shop has grown to become the most significant revenue. That wasn't always the case for YFS. They do get pretty significant dollars from grants from the MIYFS Foundation. It is a pretty substantial donor. I don't know that A, B, and C was intended to be, sort of a hierarchy of the importance of those revenues. I will say the thrift shop, in committing the revenues, and that's very specific language, and it has to do with GASB 54, which says in order for us to call something a special revenue fund, which the YFS fund is technically a special revenue fund type, that the majority of revenues coming into that fund have to be committed for a specific purpose. So that is where that language comes from, straight from the rules as they are defined by GASB 54.
Okay. You're comfortable with it as it's written?
It needs to be that way for us to maintain the Youth and Family Services Fund as a special revenue fund for accounting and reporting purposes.
All right. I'm happy. Anyone else? Questions? Looking for a motion then.
Mr. Mayor, move to suspend the City Council Rules of Procedure 5.2 requiring a first and second reading of all ordinances.
Second.
Mr. Mayor, you want to vote on
Yeah, let's vote on that. So all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Carries on a 4-2 vote. Mike?
All right, Mr. Mayor, move to adopt ordinance 13C-10, amending Chapter 4.40 of the Mercer Island City Code regarding funds.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, Dan?
I have a problem with the provision we're talking about, 4.4010. I always, when I look at provisions like that, I always need to review them not through a lens which looks at who our current director of finance is, because Chip will not be here someday, and there might be another person here who, for whatever reason, doesn't have the same.
Much shadier than Chip.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know who that person's going to be, and we are giving an authority which I honestly don't totally understand to an appointed person, and it's not even the city manager is who we have control over, but we have absolutely no control as the city council over the director of finance. As the city manager has made clear to us many times, if we want to get on the finance director's case, or any person other than city manager's case, we have to talk to the city manager. We don't talk to the finance director or any other director. So I'm concerned that we are giving some general authority to create or cancel a specific fund, and I'm just not sure what that means. Now, what Luann has said is that, well, that's not a problem because the finance director cannot expend or deposit money into that fund without the prior approval of the city council. So and I will accept that assurances, but I would like to have that in the ordinance. So what I would propose is an amendment basically codifying that statement that Luann made. So after the first sentence, adding the following, that says after the first sentence in 4.40.010, it would read, notwithstanding the foregoing, no funds may be deposited into or expended from a fund created by the Director of Finance utilizing this authority without prior approval of the City Council. And I can, if someone seconds that, I can read that again.
Second.
Okay, so I'll read it slowly, Deb.
Can I just check with you one moment? Because notwithstanding the foregoing is more legalese, but that for purposes of legislative documents, it might be better to say provided that. Just a suggestion.
Okay. So as part of, before the period at the end of that first sentence, or do you want me to make it a separate sentence?
If you're saying provided that, you could do it either way.
Okay.
It's okay either way.
So we'll make the sentence will now read, provided that no funds may be deposited into or expended from a fund created by the Director of Finance utilizing this authority without prior approval of the City Council. And if that amendment is approved by the council, it clarifies that we are maintaining the authority over the city's finances, which ultimately is our responsibility. And again, I have complete faith in Chip, and it's not. I'm not putting this as a reflection of my faith or lack thereof in Chip. I just feel that the role of the city council as supervisor of the public trust needs to, or as guardian of public trust needs to be maintained.
Chip and Rich, I'm just looking for your sense of feedback on this.
Totally fine with that.
Okay.
There's only one scenario I can think of in which I could create a fund in theory and take a revenue source and have it go to that fund. And it could accumulate there. The council would find out about it sometime, but if I needed to expend funds, I would have to come to the council for sure. So what I like about what you're suggesting is any deposit of money there and any expenditure therefrom would have to come to the council's attention. So I'm totally good with that.
Okay.
If Chip's happy, that certainly meets my test. I think if I understood the language, you'll still be in the business of periodically having to come back and have the council approve getting rid of old funds based on that language. You'll still have to do this exercise again.
It's okay. It's so infrequent. It's not a big deal. And just for the record, as a matter of practice, I try not to do budget adjustments after the fact. There are exceptions, some grants, and some usually small piddly things. I try to have you approve a budget adjustment before we actually go and spend the money. It's not my regular practice to have it be backwards looking, just so you know.
Actually, Richard, I only dealt with funds that were created, not funds that were canceled. So it only prevents the finance director from using a new fund that he or she creates.
Yeah, but he has to have prior approval of the council to expend or deposit
into a fund that he creates without getting our approval first.
And I don't know, we'd have to think about whether or not that also just means on the day that there's nothing in the account and he no longer, or in the fund, and he no longer needs it for any purpose, will he have the authority to actually sunset it?
We don't now.
We don't now.
We have to come for
We still
budget
have-
adjustment to move the money out of an obsolete fund.
And if I read
So
this
there's no
correctly,
change.
he would have that authority.
Yes.
Yes.
An obsolete fund.
Yeah, I'm not
An
taking that away.
empty obsolete fund, you would have no problem.
Under the way it's drafted and proposed now, it's just, you have that, you can create it and you can get rid of it, but you just can't spend or deposit without, money can't flow without the council's approval, but the actual fund structure you get to manage. And so you come back every 5 years and get rid of old funds. I guess we can do this and everybody has an interesting conversation and we do it.
Okay. And just a bit of clarification, this is Deb and Dan, I guess, or Katie and Dan, so after the word principles, is there a period now and a new sentence, or is this a...
We're going to go with comma, provided that.
Okay. We have amendment, it's been seconded, is there any discussion on the amendment at this point? All right, all in favor of, well, I'm just going to say the amendment, which I think we've all got. Please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. We're back to the main motion, which was adopt ordinance 13C-10, amending Chapter 440 of the Mercer Island Code regarding funds. And now it has an amendment to it. Is there further discussion on that? All right, with that, Deb, is there something I need to do?
Excuse me. For purposes of clarification, who made the original motion and the second on that particular?
Mike and Debbie.
Mike, Debbie, in that order. Thank you.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, that motion carries unanimously. Mike, you want to try the third?
Sure, the trifecta. Adopt ordinance 13C-11, amending Chapter 3.55 of the Mercer Island City Code regarding the Mercer Island Arts Council.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Luan, thank you. Well done. And Chip, thank you. We are done with regular business at 8:20. Councilmember absences. Councilmember Braun is someplace off the South American coast, I think.
Good for her. Move to approve her...
Is she on one of your
Yeah,
ships?
she's on one of my ships.
It actually did leave port?
And she's giving me her proxy if she wants to get off the ship.
So,
Move to excuse her absence.
As long as she's spending enough on the ship.
all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Very well. She is excused. She'll be missing from our next meeting, too, I believe. Planning schedule.
Sorry. I unfortunately will be missing my first city council meeting on November 4th.
Okay. Any other upcoming absences we should be aware of?
Is everyone going to be in attendance tomorrow night?
Thursday night. Thursday night.
I will not be there because I originally on my schedule was at 6 o'clock and I cannot do 5:15.
Okay, thank you. The school district was asking, so.
It's at
5:15, about a quarter to till, we'll have some food for you, but convene at 5:15. Here.
It's here or school board?
Here.
It's here. It's here.
We do everything here now, and I haven't figured out how we're going to mic this up. We need to talk about that tomorrow, Deb. Or actually, I don't even know if you're around tomorrow. I'll have to think about it.
Jan's taking care of all the arrangements, and she and I spoke earlier today.
That's on food, but on how do we actually mic up? We've never done this before.
Yeah, we only have 2 wireless
Yeah,
mics.
we've done it here.
Tomorrow.
And the other issue that we ran into was that we were glad to have some absences because we didn't really all fit up here very well.
We did it up here.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, we did. You're
We
right.
have.
You're
We've
right.
done one
All
previously.
right.
The meeting's not
So we-
tomorrow, it's Thursday.
It's Thursday. Right.
So Dan, we thank you for being absent. You weren't going to fit in.
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll do it up here, and
For the people
we will have the
that
mics up there. So,
Okay, so no other absences for Thursday and no other upcoming absences of which we should be aware. Okay. Planning schedule.
planning schedule is as presented with one exception. On November 4th, the study session, neither Sound Transit or the city is ready to talk about the term sheet or the construction schedule. We are putting together a meeting of the principals in these discussions, and including the mayor and deputy mayor if we can. So I don't see that actually coming until probably after the first of the year. So we need more time. And then we have the shoreline, the SMP coming for first reading on the 4th, and then adoption hopefully on the 18th. I think you're going to find it's pretty clean. And I thought we might have that for tonight, but the final ordinances hadn't been drafted to my satisfaction or Katie's, so we decided we'd wait and get the packet exactly right for the next meeting. That's it.
Also on planning schedule, I put out the question of dates for our study, or our planning session in January, and would welcome feedback. So I haven't had much of that yet. If it's too early, I guess you probably said everything was okay. If it's too early, Mike, you got back to me already? You did? Okay.
It's
I'm sorry.
the thing I said was MLK weekend. You included MLK weekend.
Okay, and we should take that one off. Okay. Board appointments, we have none. Council member reports. Mike Grady.
We had a tour of the Cedar with the Y8 group last month, and that always went real well. A lot of rain that day, unfortunately, but if you can get kids out up the Cedar, the sockeye in particular are still migrating and spawning, so that's a great activity to witness. I had a chance to, this is not on kind of the regular schedule, but I had a chance this morning to go to a meeting with the Balmers and Coach Pete Carroll and company on We Day. Remember I talked to you guys about We Day? Okay, so I'm going to really push this with the council and the school board, not only now, but after I'm no longer on council, because it's a year-long event, and Seattle was the first of what will be now many cities in the United States that are going to take this on. But the impact just in Washington State alone is just tremendous. I mean, they raised over $500,000 just from the kids. It impacted over 250 school districts across the state. And it's going to just keep expanding and expanding every year. And fortunately, Microsoft has stepped up to be the one of the key sponsors, again, for the event, which is March 21st of next year at Key Arena. And we'll have a litany of various speakers that will turn it into the Super Bowl of volunteering. But the reason that I'm going to continue to push with the city is we already have a ready-made mechanism for our kids to funnel right into this with our student volunteer program with Youth and Family Services. And we've got a model that we, quite frankly, should be sharing from across not only the state, but across the country, where we're taking revenues from like a thrift store, funding Youth and Family Services, and using that to then fund programs that train our kids to be volunteers, which is very similar to what We Day and We Act and the whole foundation supports. I also had a chance to have a very interesting conversation with folks that are putting on what they call compassion games. So it's going to be tied to We Day, and this will pique your interest because what they're trying to do is identify key cities around the country that then enter this competition to see who, in fact, is the most compassionate. And, you know, I don't know what the metrics are, but I could just say from looking at my notes a little bit earlier that it's something that Mercer Island really needs to participate in somehow. Mainly because we already have the infrastructure in place with the website, with the voice program and SVP and everything else. So I think we could win this. And it's truly a win-win.
And the premise is somewhat different from the Hunger Games.
It is, yes,
We don't
much
have to
different.
send our children
much different. So anyway, it's coming. I will keep feeding stuff to you, and then hopefully we can get it out through the school district and Gary and my neighbor Pat Raymond and others on the school board. And to what extent we can get every single school involved again this year, we will. They're also looking for key sponsors, so I'm looking to my fellow council members. Any sponsor opportunities you can think of, send me an email, and I will loop them in because we have another event over in Bellevue in November 11th to try to sign up more sponsors, either financial or human capital, to help not only put on the event in March, but also to have the year-long activities where the kids participate in local events and global events. And in order for the kids to go to the big event in March, they don't buy a ticket. They have to earn their way in. So they have to show that they've done local volunteering, and it could range from stream bed restoration to dealing with bullying at their grade school to global, creating funds to help build water systems in Kenya, or you name the activity. But it has to be both. And so what we're trying to do is build a volunteer corps to train the volunteers, to then eventually have kids that go out and come back and train the volunteers. And we end up with an endless supply of people who are turning, as they say, me into we. So it is well worth the effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Debbie.
I just comment on the ribbon cutting ceremony that we had at the new Luther Burbank Park just about 2 weeks ago. It was great weather. It was a great turnout, and I think again it was a real testament to community effort that extended, beyond the city staff and city council members to MIPA, to many other community entities, individual families, etc. So it was just an all-around feel-good, smiley event to see an incredible restoration of that facility, which also retained, I think, some of its unique attractions and charms, i.e. concrete walls. So it was super, and I hope everybody who hasn't been down there yet can get down soon and enjoy it.
And we had a few boring adult speakers, but some kids got to chime in with their favorite elements of the playground, which was fun.
The mayor was on the zip line, too, and he should have.
Of course. Of course. Yeah.
I didn't ask if there's a weight limit on the zip line.
Well, I can attest to it being pretty high if there is.
No, I was also at that event, and it really was a nice event to do, and I was amazed at how sharp the scissors was. We actually cut the ribbon and didn't hurt ourselves in the process. No, it's great. Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah. Tom?
Yeah, kudos to everyone involved. Kudos to everyone involved with the park. That was really a great event and a gorgeous park. I also wanted to comment, the other night was All Island Band Night, and it was pretty remarkable to see the 800 kids in the Mercer Island School District who are part of band from fifth grade, pardon me, all the way to senior year. It was just amazing. And then to go to the tolling event last night where Washed Out was taking public comments, and to have somebody specifically mention Parker Bixby, who is one of the key people involved with the band, thinking about leaving Mercer Island if there's tolling because of expense. That was really kind of, the juxtaposition was pretty shocking. And so I think that as we think about our messaging and looking out, that to really make sure we're reaching that broader audience of band parents and other people, and that is just one quintessential example of somebody who has a huge impact on so many kids and so many aspects of our community. So, but that was a really fabulous night, the All Island Band Night, and hard to say. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is, as part of Sound Cities Association, there are some committee opportunities for members to possibly get involved with, and we have struggled kind of as a council to figure out where to bring up and discuss SCA policy sometimes in some of the committees, and they've recently extended the deadline to accept applications for some of the committees, and 3 of the key committees that they're looking for people are Regional Transit Committee, the King County Flood Control District, which I think Mike used to be on, and the South Central Action Area Caucus Group, which is really the salmon recovery, Puget Sound oriented group. So wanted to see if anybody on the council was interested in putting their name forth as a Mercer Island representative on any of those, and we could, and what they like, SCA likes to make sure the councils support that person's participation. So if someone's interested, if we could support their interest.
I submitted
or not.
my name for the flood control.
Okay.
Do we have a summary of who's putting their name? Because I know individually we went forward.
Yes, and no, so no, we don't. I can tell you I put my name in for both of the transportation ones, or the Regional Transportation Council and the PSRC Transportation Board, Policy Board. You put your name in for?
The growth planning. Management.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, great. So we have no crossover. So, which is great, because if we have crossover, then they won't accept either.
Okay.
So I don't know if we need to have a motion to approve the people's submissions, or, okay, because there's no duplication.
No,
we're fine.
decision-making actually happens at SCA. And if you guys all got appointed to what you put your name in for, that would be the most regional representation we've had in probably a decade. So that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you guys for doing that. It's very exciting, and, you know.
Yep. Mike?
So while the 2 of us were leaning against the wall at the hearing, I kind of looked across the auditorium there and saw our police officers. They were all looking sharp, standing at parade rest, and having been one to stand at parade rest for a long time, that's not a natural position, but they looked, uniform looked sharp, their stature was sharp, and that's exactly what our public wants to see. So please pass that on to the chief.
And happy to report that while tolling is a hot issue, there were no riots at the high school or other,
Well, I mean, our citizens are just fantastic, bringing and the decorum that they exhibit on such a highly charged issue as that. And, like, if you're going to run for a position, you want to do it on Mercer Island. The worst you'll ever get is, I don't agree with you, but thanks for running. That's the worst you'll ever get here on the island.
Yeah, but just in case, I did check with Sergeant Noel, and he said he had his hand on his taser for anything that might pop up. He was ready. Actually, all I can remember was Councilmember Grady's back going out the door when we demoed. You'll never live that one down.
Why did I need to do that?
No, I don't know why. I'd have been right behind you if they had lined me up.
Let's see, I've got a couple things, and actually, one of these is a bit back to the planning schedule, so forgive me on that, but Rich and I had talked, and then it actually, we talked, and then it kind of went away, and I'm not sure where we landed, but I want to bring the council into this. We have talked in the past, sort of too late, about adopting a legislative agenda, and we started the conversation thinking, okay, well, we ought to get ourselves a bit organized this year if we're going to do it, so that we're not into the end of January saying we should develop this when it really is too late to have an impact with it. Clearly, the whole transportation tolling and associated things, we have a legislative policy already adopted. Through our actions with tonight with the adoption of the clue work, we've set another one, but
where we left it, I think the last thing I suggested was that we take AWC's legislative priorities, Sound City's legislative priorities, and Noel and I would identify within those lists those issues that really connect with Mercer Island, and send you an email or a memo saying that we believe these are the topics that most connect with us and that we would want to be active in monitoring or active in Olympia in the next session. Not try to create something out of whole cloth. Let's piggyback on, we have lobbyists. I mean, the AWC and the Sound Cities are already in our corner. Let's use the work that they've done and narrow it down to our interests where they intersect, and then we'll get that in front of you. I don't know that you had a lot of time to do a council agenda bill discussion, debate, and I just think let's give you a list. And
I would look at that, Mr. Mayor, for the 2014. Are you looking for the 2014 session, not the special session?
No, not the special session.
No, this is just
but the 2014 session's almost.
This is Representative Sen's first session, and we need to make sure she knows what's up. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you for that. Well, go ahead.
Solicitor ordinance? Maybe I'm missing it here on the agenda, the planning schedule?
We have that on our list to bring forward, but I don't think we have time until 2014 to bring that forward.
Is it on the list?
I expected to see that sooner.
No, actually, that is just probably my error for not having put it on the planning calendar. I think we had promised you that we were going to bring you an ordinance in at the next meeting. We're going to try to adopt it by the end of the year. Yeah, that's on there. As you can see, these meetings are getting full. What I'd urge you to do on things that are really pretty simple, try to be economical in the use of your time. Save your time for the big items and pass the easy ones. Because these are...
Okay.
Let's draft an ordinance.
So then a couple more reports. Danton and I had a meeting with the Farmers Market Board this evening, talking about YTN, and they're asking questions about how that all came together, and I think good meeting we had. So I expect, and as we left, they and Manny were launching into their own conversation about how it all works together. So I think it ended up in a good spot there. Clue, the Climate Legislative Executive Work Group is having a listening session tomorrow night in Seattle. I intend to attend that meeting, may speak, but in their last meeting of the electeds in Olympia, they were debating amongst themselves whether to give elected officials any priority in speaking, and they opted not to, so I'll throw my name into it. Yes. They specifically said, I'll let those guys fight it out with everybody else. So that's tomorrow night. And then Friday, I have invited a number of mayors to our council chambers to have a discussion about the clue work and whether the potential for a collaborative message on that. So that will be happening on this Friday. That's all I've got. Unless there's anything else, we are adjourned. Thank you all.